I start fighting them. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a jewelry DIY. These guys are on the menu. We also have two other designs, and I make them out of polymer clay and bronze wire. So pretty basic materials. So if you're interested in seeing how I did this, then just keep watching. So my inspiration for this project actually came from my good friend Pinterest. I kind of just looked on here to see what shapes were possible, what was popular, and just get a sense of how these forms kind of stack up together in an earring. These are the main materials that I'm going to be using. I got some Sculpey 3 in a bunch of colors. I have bronze wire 20 gauge and 4mm 20 gauge jump rings. That little red piece you see is for rounding off wire tips. Turns out didn't work, don't recommend it, so I didn't use it. Before getting into my material, I did sketch out some designs for what I wanted to make. I was very certain I wanted to start with some beads, and I kind of just experimented the rest of the way, making a bunch of random pieces and then using those how I saw fit at the end. I feel like I need to preface the rest of the video by saying that I've never worked in polymer clay before. This was an experiment and a first time for me, so anything you see me doing is just from some mild amount of research that I did. I'll leave all of my resources that I use down below, but here I'm just conditioning my clay. Sculpey 3 was a lot more soft than I expected it to be, so I was just conditioning it to warm it up a little bit and then rolling it out flat into a slab. This slab that I'm rolling here ended up being way too thin, so you can see me just rolling it out, but I ended up scrapping that, also putting it on a piece of wax paper since it was sticking to my ceramic tile. But I ended up folding it back up and re-rolling it out, which is what I'm doing here. So based on what I was able to research, there are certain methods to use to roll out clay to prevent those air bubbles that you see. I am still learning how to do that, so to fix the issue I go in and poke them out with a pin or a toothpick. I use my X-Acto blade at one point, and then now I'm just cutting out even sized circles at about 1/2 inch that I can roll into beads. The reason I'm cutting them at the same circumference is because this will ensure that they're all the same size. Now, I'm very much aware of the fact that these are handmade polymer clay beads, so I'm not focusing too much on making them perfectly round, but I'm rolling them gently in the palms of my hands and getting them as round as possible. I have seen some people use latex gloves. The gloves that I had were too big, so it was making it more cumbersome to do this step than to not use them. So I ended up taking them off and just using my hands, and there were some fingerprints left behind, but it wasn't so noticeable. Moving on, the next step is important for beads since I'm going to need to have a hole through them. I'm using a wooden toothpick to basically skewer the bead, gently spinning the toothpick into the clay until I see it poke out the other side, and then right as it pokes out, I flip it around and go back through the other way, repeating 1 or 2 times until I have a clean hole. I want to emphasize a gentle turning of the toothpick and not pushing because that will absolutely deform your beads. So take your time and turn the pick gently into the bead. I used these 4 as testers for baking and curing them on this little contraption that I made with some of my extra wire. And then in the meantime, while those were baking, it took about 15 minutes, I started to cut out different shapes using different things around my house to make different forms out of the clay. After experimenting with different household objects as cookie cutters, I wanted to start to bring in some color into the slab. So I'm grabbing my neutrals, my dark brown, and my tan color, rolling them into snakes, and then cutting up little pieces and laying them on the white clay, just playing around with what designs I think would look nice. I started to flatten the pieces once I was done laying them down, and I realized I wasn't in love with how the design was looking yet, so I started folding the slab back up and it kind of created this marble texture. Sculpey 3 was actually much easier to blend, so I didn't want to handle it too much to where it transformed into a new solid color, but actually had stripes and layers of the different tones within the slab. This marbling technique ended up being fairly unpredictable, so when I finished rolling it out, I realized I wanted more of that dark brown in there to complement the tan. So I rolled out a small snake and cut it up into little dots, and then laid those dots on the marble sheet and folded it and rolled it out again. After that, my marbling produced something that looked like this, and I was fairly happy with what I saw, so I used that slab to create some marbled beads instead of just the plain white beads. I added some little tiny pieces of the dark brown clay after rolling the beads, and then slowly and gently flattened those onto the outside of the bead by rolling it between my fingers, and that gave some nice contrast between the white, the tan, and the dark brown. Skewering them just as I did with the white beads as well. Good morning. We have our beautiful morning sun coming in. I have my coffee. I have my busted ass morning face. Anyway, I've been doing this project over a few days, so I wanted to jump in and just explain what the heck has been going on so I can gather my own thoughts. But I went ahead and made a few more beads. I have these like bigger semicircles, which these guys are thick. So I'm not sure I'm gonna actually use these for earrings, but maybe I'm gonna keep them to see. And then I have little semicircles, so cute. I also made little rings from my slab, and these were the inserts. So I don't know what I'm gonna do with these, but I figured I'd keep them because they were nice shapes anyway. So next steps are going to be the earring wires, which I wanna do that like SCurve one for a lot of them, and I also am not using like soldering or anything. I can't do a stud with a post, so I'm gonna do like the SCurve. But yeah, that's the plan so far. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a jig and then make some of the SCurve earring wires, and we'll see how that goes. So we made our jig, and now we're making our SCurve earring wires. Here I'm just straightening out the wire from my spool. Again, it's a 20 gauge bronze wire, dead soft. So I'm straightening it between my fingers and then using this little jig that I made to first make that small loop that we see on SCurve earrings. Although I made this jig myself, these are widely available for purchase and they are fairly cheap as well. So don't worry if you don't have the resources to make it. You can just search ear wire jig on Rio Grande, and I think they come in around $4 for the jigs. Rio Grande is a site that I used in school when I was taking jewelry making classes, and that's also where I bought my wire and my jump rings. So go ahead, take a look there and see if you can find what you need. And once that's all trimmed down and pressed closed, I place it back onto my jig to bend the rest of the shape. This jig ensures that all of my SCurve earring wires are going to be the exact same bend, and since I'm bending them on a flat surface, they're going to be aligned and I need to do less hammering work in the end. After I have two wires all bent, I then stack them up on top of each other and give them a little bit of a 45-degree tail, and after that, since we snipped off the ends, they're going to be a bit sharp, so we want to soften that up and round it off so when we put it through our ear, it doesn't poke us and hurt. I'm using a silicone carbide sandpaper at 150 grit, I believe, but since it's 20 gauge wire, you can pretty much use any sandpaper and you'll be able to take down the rough edge. Now, I did say bending it on a flat surface would lessen our hammering work, but we're not hammering it at all because hammering actually hardens our metal, so it prevents it from bending out of shape while we're putting it through our ears or through normal wear and tear. I think a nylon mallet is the most recommended tool for this because it doesn't flatten our material, but mine is a hard rubber mallet and it worked just fine. If you don't have that and you're using a regular hammer, it will most likely flatten the wire that you're using, but it will still harden it. Next, I'm just preparing all other design elements in wire that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to repeat the same process of bending and hammering all of these pieces as well. I'm alternating between my needle nose pliers and my flat nose pliers because sometimes I feel like the needle nose are just too narrow that they slip off my wire, and my flat nose pliers give me a lot more control, especially when closing the wire shut on the jump rings or on those smaller loops that you see on the SCurve and those straight pieces. And now all that's left to do is assemble our earrings. I didn't end up using those clay rings that I made because after I baked them, I drilled a hole and it made them crack. So unfortunately I couldn't use those forms. I also didn't use those small semicircles that I made because I tried to paint them and I just wasn't happy with the design that I painted on them. So I decided to scrap those as well. But I am very satisfied with the 3 designs that I ended up with. So let's take a look at what we got. And here we are with the final result. Out of all 3, I think this is my absolute favorite design. I love the stack. I also love hoops with beads, so these were pretty fun to make too. Very comfortable in my ears as well, not too heavy. And then these guys were kind of a last minute decision based on the little pieces I had left after my initial plan was scrapped because I ruined my clay pieces. But I'm very happy with these as well. Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. If you're interested in more DIY content, more jewelry, more sewing, don't forget to give me a like and a subscribe, and leave me a comment down below of some video ideas for the future or something you'd like to see in more detail from this video. Bye!